voices heard. To others he was a brutal dictator, a man who led armies to crush those who opposed him. His rule as Lord Protector remembered as one of severe religious intolerance and military oppression. His name is synonymous with the tumultuous period of the English Civil War, a time of deep social and political upheaval. Cromwell's rise from humble beginnings to become the most powerful man in England is a story of ambition, conviction, and unrelenting determination. A devout Puritan and skilled military strategist, Cromwell was instrumental in shaping the course of English history, both on the battlefield and in the halls of power. His leadership during the English Civil War saw him triumph over the Royalists, led by King Charles I, a victory that led not only to the King's execution, but also to the temporary abolition of the monarchy. However, Cromwell's legacy is as complex as it is significant, seen by some as a liberator and by others as a tyrant. Welcome to the ASMR History Hub, where we explore the lives of remarkable historical figures in a soothing, immersive way. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey through the life of Oliver Cromwell, a man who rose from obscurity to change the very fabric of English society. Whether you view him as a champion of liberty or a harsh authoritarian, Cromwell's life and actions left an indelible mark on England and the world beyond. But before we dive into his military exploits and his political rise, let's go back to where it all began. Cromwell's early life and family background provide crucial insight into how this remarkable figure was shaped. His roots, upbringing, and values were the foundations for the incredible journey that lay ahead. Oliver Cromwell was born on April 25th, 1599, in the small market town of Huntingdon, England. His family, though not of the highest nobility, was of the lesser gentry, people of some means, but far from the aristocracy. Cromwell's father, Robert, was a local landowner, and his mother, Elizabeth, descended from the prominent Stuart family. From the very beginning, Oliver's life was marked by a sense of duty and modesty, a combination that would shape his views and actions in the years to come. His upbringing was firmly rooted in Puritan values, which would later become the compass guiding him through the turbulence of England's political and religious turmoil. Growing up in a devout Puritan household, Cromwell's early experiences were steeped in the teachings of Calvinist doctrine. His family was committed to the idea that God's will was supreme and that the Church of England, in its current form, had drifted dangerously far from the true path of faith. This sense of religious dissatisfaction planted the seeds of reformist zeal in young Oliver's mind, a zeal that would later burst into full bloom on the battlefields of civil war. Despite his deep religious convictions, Cromwell's early life was fairly unremarkable. He attended the local grammar school in Huntingdon, where he learned the basics of Latin, history, and the scriptures. His journey to higher education began at Sydney Sussex College, Cambridge, a which was cut short when his father passed away, forcing him to return home and take over the family's modest estate. Upon his return, Cromwell's life settled into a rhythm that would seem ordinary for any man of his station. He married Elizabeth Bourchier in 1620, a union that brought with it not only love, but also valuable connections to influential London merchants and Puritan families. Cromwell spent his early adult years farming and managing the estate, but beneath the surface of this seemingly tranquil life, his dissatisfaction with the political and religious state of the country was brewing. His modest beginnings as a farmer might seem a far cry from the halls of power he would one day occupy, but they were an essential part of his story, grounding him in a sense of practicality and responsibility. It was during this time that Cromwell experienced a period of deep personal transformation. His faith, always a central part of his identity, grew even stronger. Some accounts suggest that he experienced a kind of spiritual awakening, which solidified his belief that he was destined for a higher purpose. In a letter to his cousin, Colonel Valentine Walton, in 1644, Cromwell wrote, "I live to serve God in this work." This phrase would serve as a mantra throughout his life, encapsulating the deep sense of divine mission that drove his actions. Cromwell did not see his rise to power as a personal victory, but as a fulfillment of God's will, a belief that would make him a formidable and often unyielding leader. Puritanism wasn't just a set of religious beliefs for Cromwell, it was the lens through which he viewed the world. The strict moral code and emphasis on personal responsibility that defined Puritan life became the core principles guiding his decisions, both in his private life and later in his public career. His faith was not the kind that stayed confined to the church. It spilled over into every aspect of his existence. He believed that England was straying from the true path, and that it was his duty to help restore godly rule, no matter the cost. His time as a farmer, though quiet and seemingly ordinary, was marked by a growing awareness of the injustices and failings of England's governance. He had witnessed firsthand the struggles of the common people, and these experiences only deepened his belief that drastic change was needed. By the time he entered the political stage, Cromwell was a man with a clear vision, one rooted in faith, personal experience, and a desire for reform. Cromwell's early years, though humble, were the crucible in which his character was forged. His modest upbringing, combined with his intense religious convictions, laid the foundation for his future as a leader who would stop at nothing to achieve what he believed to be a divinely ordained mission. The boy from Huntingdon, once tending to his family's farm, was about to step onto a much larger stage, a stage that would see him rise to unprecedented heights, from the quiet fields of Huntingdon to the corridors of power in Westminster. Cromwell's journey was about to take a dramatic turn. His entry into politics and his meteoric rise to become one of the most influential figures in English history would mark the beginning of a new era. Cromwell's journey into politics began quietly, almost unremarkably. In 1628, he entered the House of Commons as the Member of Parliament for Huntingdon, a small constituency near his family estate. At this point, Cromwell was far from the well-known figure he would later become. He was a relatively obscure country gentleman, representing a minor district, but even then, his beliefs were clear. He supported the Puritan cause and harboured deep mistrust for the policies of King Charles, whose attempts to govern without Parliament and his perceived Catholic sympathies deeply alarmed Cromwell. These early experiences in Parliament introduced him to the political landscape of the time, and although his role was initially minor, it planted the seeds of his future ambitions. For over a decade, Cromwell remained on the fringes of the political world, observing the growing tensions between the monarchy and Parliament. By 1640, when King Charles was forced to recall Parliament after years of personal rule, the country was on the brink of civil war. Cromwell's frustrations with the king's authoritarian approach and his sympathy for the grievances of the Puritans made him a vocal advocate for change. His fiery speeches in the House of Commons and his unwavering commitment to the cause of religious and political reform began to set him apart. The quiet farmer from Huntingdon was beginning to make waves. However, it wasn't in the halls of Parliament, but on the battlefield where Cromwell would truly rise to prominence. In 1642, when the English Civil War erupted, Cromwell's transformation from an obscure politician to a military leader was rapid and dramatic. With no formal military training, he threw himself into the conflict, rallying a small group of local men to fight for Parliament. It was here that his natural leadership abilities began to shine. Cromwell had an uncanny ability to inspire loyalty and discipline among his men, and his deep religious convictions only fueled his determination to defeat the Royalist forces. As the war raged on, Cromwell's reputation as a military commander grew. He was instrumental in the formation of the new model army in 1645, a professional, well-disciplined fighting force that would prove decisive in the conflict. Cromwell's leadership of the cavalry was particularly effective, earning him the nickname Old Ironsides for his steadfastness in battle. He believed that the righteousness of their cause would bring victory, famously telling his troops before the Battle of Marston Moor in 1644, "Trust in God and keep your powder dry." This combination of faith and pragmatism defined Cromwell's military approach. The Battle of Marston Moor was a turning point in the war. Cromwell's forces, fighting alongside the Scots, delivered a crushing blow to the Royalists, securing the north of England for Parliament. It was at this moment that Cromwell's star truly began to rise. He followed this success with another pivotal victory at the Battle of Naseby in 1645, where the new model army decisively defeated King Charles I's forces, effectively sealing the fate of the Royalist cause. Cromwell's leadership, both strategic and inspirational, was key to these divide emerged within Parliament itself over what to do with the captured king. Many, including Cromwell, believed that Charles thus had betrayed his people and could not be trusted to rule. The king's attempts to negotiate behind Parliament's back only deepened this distrust. For Cromwell, the solution was clear. Charles had to be removed permanently. Cromwell's role in the trial and execution of King Charles was perhaps the most controversial and defining moment of his career. In 1649, the king was put on trial for high treason, accused of waging war against his own people. Cromwell was one of the most prominent voices advocating for the king's execution, viewing it as a necessary act to prevent further tyranny. His belief that the monarch had been placed on the throne by divine right had long been replaced by a conviction that no man, even a king, should stand above the law. When Charles I was beheaded in January 1649, it sent shockwaves across Europe. The execution of a reigning monarch was unprecedented, and Cromwell's involvement in this act solidified his place as one of the most controversial figures in English history. With the monarchy abolished and England declared a republic, Cromwell's influence only grew. His military victories had already established him as a leader, but now he was poised to take on an even greater role in shaping the future of the nation. For Cromwell, this was not simply about power. It was about creating a godly commonwealth, a nation governed by divine principles rather than the whims of kings. His deeply held Puritan beliefs would continue to drive him, shaping both his leadership style and his vision for the country. As England entered a new chapter, Cromwell found himself at the centre of power, not only as a military leader, but as a key figure in the new Republican government. His rise from the battlefields of the Civil War to the highest echelons of political authority was complete, but his journey was far from over. The country he had fought to transform was in chaos, torn apart by factions and struggling to find stability. Cromwell's role as Lord Protector, a title he would eventually take, would test not only his leadership, but his very vision for the future of England. The creation of the Commonwealth, with Cromwell at its helm, marked a radical departure from the monarchy-dominated system that had ruled England for centuries. His new position would bring with it immense challenges, as Cromwell navigated the difficult task of governing a deeply divided nation. What followed was a period of intense change, as Cromwell sought to build a new political and social order, one that reflected his Puritan ideals. With the execution of King Charles in 1649, England found itself at a crossroads. For the first time in its history, the country had no monarch, and the centuries-old institution of the crown was abolished. In its place rose the Commonwealth, a fledgling republic that promised a new form of government, free from the tyranny of kings. But the reality was far more complex and uncertain. The death of the king did not bring the peace and unity that many had hoped for. Instead, the nation was racked by internal divisions, and Oliver Cromwell found himself at the heart of this new political experiment, navigating a treacherous path between reform and control. Cromwell's influence grew rapidly in the early days of the Commonwealth. As one of the key military leaders who had helped to secure Parliament's victory in the English Civil War, he was already a man of great power. But it wasn't just his military prowess that earned him the trust of the new regime. It was his deep-rooted convictions. Cromwell believed that the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of the Commonwealth were part of a divine mission to create a godly nation, one ruled by justice and religious purity. His unwavering belief in this cause made him both a formidable leader and, in the eyes of his enemies, a dangerous zealot. In the early years of the Commonwealth, Cromwell faced threats from all sides. The Royalists, loyal to the memory of King Charles III and determined to see his son, Charles III, restored to the throne, continued to agitate for rebellion. At the same time, more radical factions within the parliamentarian ranks, such as the Levellers, pushed for greater reforms and more democracy. The Levellers called for the dissolution of Parliament and the creation of a more representative government, a vision that went far beyond Cromwell's own. He found himself balancing the need to maintain order with the demands for deeper change, and it was here that his pragmatic side began to emerge. The Levellers, though they shared Cromwell's distaste for the old monarchy, proved to be a serious thorn in his side. They advocated for universal male suffrage, equality before the law, and the abolition of privilege. But Cromwell feared that their radical ideas would plunge the country into chaos. In 1649, as the Commonwealth faced uprisings from both Royalists and Levellers, Cromwell's response was decisive. He crushed the Levellers' mutiny at Burford, showing that while he may have been a man of faith and reform, he was also willing to use force to maintain control. Cromwell's rise to power reached its zenith in 1653, when he was installed as Lord Protector of England, Scotland, and Ireland. The title, though lacking the royal trappings of a king, effectively made him the leader of the nation. Cromwell had long been wary of kingship, but the position of Lord Protector gave him nearly all the powers of a monarch without the crown. His installation came after years of frustration with the Rump Parliament, a remnant of the Long Parliament that had ruled since the end of the Civil War. Cromwell had grown disillusioned with the Rump's inability to pass meaningful reforms, and in a dramatic act, he dissolved it in 1653, declaring, "In the name of God, go." In his new role, Cromwell sought to bring order and stability to a fractured nation. His domestic policies reflected his Puritan values and his vision of a godly society. One of his most significant initiatives was his attempt to create a broad religious tolerance, at least for Protestants. Cromwell believed in the freedom to worship, but only within the bounds of Protestantism. He extended tolerance to various Protestant sects, including Baptists and Independents, but he was merciless toward Catholics and Anglicans, whom he viewed as threats to the moral fabric of the nation. His policies led to the persecution of Catholics, especially in Ireland, where his campaigns left deep scars that would last for generations. Religion was not Cromwell's only concern. He also sought to reform the legal system, implementing a series of laws designed to reflect Puritan values. Theatres were shut down, gambling was outlawed, and even Christmas was banned as an overly indulgent celebration. These moral laws, deeply unpopular with many, reflected Cromwell's belief that England needed to return to a more disciplined, godly way of life. He was determined to root out what he saw as the corrupting influences of frivolous entertainment and vice. Though these measures often alienated the population he sought to lead. Cromwell's foreign policy, however, is where his reputation becomes even more controversial. His military campaigns in Ireland and Scotland, aimed at securing the Commonwealth's borders and crushing any remaining Royalist opposition, were brutal. The conquest of Ireland, in particular, remains a dark chapter in Cromwell's legacy. After arriving in Ireland in 1649, he launched a series of campaigns to subdue the country, which had long been a stronghold of Royalist and Catholic resistance. The siege of Drogheda in September of that year stands out for its shocking violence. After the town refused to surrender, Cromwell's forces stormed the city, killing thousands of soldiers and civilians alike. In his own words, Cromwell described the massacre as a righteous judgment of God upon these barbarous wretches. To this day, Drogheda remains a symbol of the deep divisions between England and Ireland, and Cromwell's name is still reviled in much of Ireland. Despite the harshness of his campaigns, Cromwell was a skilled military leader, and his successes in Ireland and Scotland strengthened his hold on power. In Scotland, he faced the forces of Charles II, who had been crowned king there, and sought to reclaim his father's throne in England. Cromwell's army, battle-hardened and disciplined, defeated the Scots at the Battle of Dunbar in 1650, and again at the Battle of Worcester in 1651, effectively ending Royalist hopes of a Stuart restoration, at least for the time being. As Lord Protector, Cromwell also pursued an active foreign policy beyond the British Isles. He sought to expand England's influence overseas, continuing the colonial expansion that had begun under the monarchy. His government established new trade routes and sought to increase English control over the seas, leading to conflicts with the Dutch in the Anglo-Dutch Wars. While these conflicts were largely economic, they also reflected Cromwell's belief in the divine mission of England to spread its influence and its faith. Yet, for all his successes, Cromwell's rule was far from secure. His vision of a godly republic was not shared by everyone, and his harsh measures alienated many. Even among his supporters, there were those who questioned the concentration of power in his hands. Though he had rejected the title of king, his role as Lord Protector gave him near absolute authority, and many saw little difference between Cromwell's rule and that of the monarchy he had helped overthrow. His use of the military to enforce his Cromwell's domestic reforms, while rooted in his Puritan ideals, also faced resistance. His attempts to restructure Parliament, including the creation of a new constitution known as the Instrument of Government, were met with scepticism. While the instrument aimed to create a more efficient and representative government, it ultimately placed even more power in Cromwell's hands. The dissolution of multiple parliaments during his tenure, when they failed to meet his expectations, highlighted his growing authoritarianism. As Lord Protector, Cromwell walked a fine line between maintaining control and implementing his vision of a godly society. But for all his efforts, the nation remained deeply divided. His rule brought stability, but at a cost, one that would become increasingly apparent as he faced mounting challenges to his authority. The very ideals that had driven Cromwell to fight for the Commonwealth now became the source of tension, as many questioned whether his vision for England was truly achievable. The challenges to Cromwell's rule would soon come to a head, as dissent simmered both within his government and among the people he sought to lead. His dream of a godly republic was slipping through his fingers, and the fragile peace he had fought so hard to maintain was beginning to crack. Oliver Cromwell's time as Lord Protector was far from smooth. While he had achieved unprecedented power, ruling as the head of the Commonwealth, his leadership was constantly under threat, not just from external enemies, but also from those who had once stood by his side. The ideal of a unified, godly republic seemed to slip further away with each passing year, as Cromwell faced mounting opposition from all corners of society. What had begun as a revolution against monarchy and tyranny was now, in the eyes of many, a regime that was just as controlling, just as authoritarian, and just as flawed as the one it had replaced. One of the most pressing challenges came from within Cromwell's own ranks. The very people who had once fought alongside him in the Civil War, his fellow parliamentarians, soldiers, and even some of the radical Puritans, began to lose faith in his vision. The Levellers, who had been a thorn in Cromwell's side since the early days of the Commonwealth, continued to push for more radical reforms. They demanded greater political representation, freedom of speech, and the abolition of privilege. But Cromwell, ever wary of the chaos that could follow unchecked democracy, suppressed their movement, fearing that the Levellers' ideas would lead to anarchy. Meanwhile, former allies in the army also began to turn against him. Many soldiers, who had once followed Cromwell with unwavering loyalty, grew disillusioned with the Lord Protector's increasingly autocratic style. They had fought for freedom and justice, yet they now saw their leader dissolving parliaments and ruling by decree, actions that felt eerily similar to the behaviour of the kings they had overthrown. This tension came to a head in 1653 with the failure of the bare-bones Parliament, an assembly of godly men handpicked by Cromwell to reform the country. Yet, even this Parliament could not meet his expectations. The infighting and inefficiency frustrated Cromwell. marking yet another step toward his rule by personal authority. In the wake of the bare-bones Parliament's collapse, Cromwell enacted the instrument of government, the first written constitution in England's history. On paper, it was meant to balance power between the Lord, Protector, Parliament, and the Council of State, creating a more stable and organised government. In reality, it concentrated even more power in Cromwell's hands, allowing him to govern with minimal interference. While the instrument gave the appearance of order, it did little to resolve the underlying dissent that simmered beneath the surface. Parliament remained deeply suspicious of Cromwell's motives, and many viewed him as a king in all but name. Beyond internal strife, Cromwell also faced the constant threat of Royalist rebellion. Even with the monarchy abolished, Royalist sympathisers continued to plot the restoration of the Stuart line. Charles II, the exiled son of the executed king, worked tirelessly to rally support for his cause. From his court in exile, he found allies in France and Spain, both of which were eager to see Cromwell's regime fall. Royalist uprisings, though largely unsuccessful, were a persistent reminder that Cromwell's grip on power was never entirely secure. The English countryside was dotted with conspiracies and rebellions, and though they were crushed, they kept the Commonwealth in a constant state of vigilance. One of the most notable plots was the Sealed Knot, a secret royalist organisation dedicated to restoring the monarchy. Although their efforts were ultimately unsuccessful, the constant threat they posed wore on Cromwell. The Royalists never disappeared, always lurking in the background, waiting for the right moment to strike. Foreign monarchies, too, saw opportunities in Cromwell's divided England. Spain, in particular, was keen to exploit the unrest, engaging in covert operations to support Royalist sympathisers. Cromwell's foreign policy had its successes, especially in expanding English influence, but it was a balancing act of diplomacy, war, and internal security. However, it wasn't just political dissent and conspiracies that threatened Cromwell's rule. England was facing a series of economic and social problems that increasingly alienated the general population. The cost of continuous military campaigns, both at home and abroad, was staggering. Taxes soared to fund the new model army, and ordinary citizens felt the burden of war even after the fighting had ended. The economic downturn hit the rural population especially hard, and many began to view Cromwell's government as more interested in sustaining its military power than in addressing the needs of the people. Adding to this unrest were the strict Puritan moral laws that Cromwell imposed. While he had championed religious tolerance for Protestant sects, his vision of a godly society came with heavy restrictions on everyday life. Theatres were closed, festivals and celebrations were banned, and any form of public entertainment that didn't fit within Puritan ideals was outlawed. Cromwell believed these measures were necessary to purify the nation, but for many it felt like a stranglehold on personal freedoms. Even simple pleasures like dancing or celebrating Christmas were forbidden, and this level of control led to growing resentment. What had started as a war for liberty had, in the eyes of many, become a regime of austerity and repression. Cromwell, for all his strength as a leader, was not blind to the strain that this constant conflict, both within and outside his government, placed on the country. He had never relished war, nor did he enjoy ruling through force. In one of his more reflective moments, he remarked, "I do not like war. It is a thing no man should be fond of. The weight of governing a divided nation, of constantly battling dissent, and of maintaining order through military might, was wearing him down. Though he was a man of unshakable conviction, even Cromwell could feel the toll of endless strife. As the years went on, Cromwell's health began to decline, a physical manifestation of the challenges he faced. The Lord Protector had ruled with an iron fist, but the discontent brewing among his subjects and the constant political intrigue wore on his mind and body. His vision of a godly republic, free from the corruption of kings and guided by moral principles, was crumbling under the weight of internal conflict, economic hardship, and social unrest. The growing dissatisfaction with Cromwell's rule was becoming harder to ignore. The cracks in the Commonwealth were deepening, and the man who had once been hailed as a hero of the people was now viewed by many as just another tyrant. As his strength waned, so too did the unity of the country he had fought so hard to protect. Though Cromwell had weathered rebellions, conspiracies, and personal attacks, his greatest challenge was keeping the fragile Commonwealth together. It was clear that Cromwell's time as Lord Protector was drawing to a close, but the question of what would follow his rule loomed large. The Commonwealth had been built around his leadership, and without him, the delicate balance of power was at risk of collapse. Cromwell's health may have been failing, but the unresolved tensions and conflicts that had defined his rule would not fade so easily. The country was left teetering on the edge, waiting for what would come next in the wake of its most controversial leader's impending death. By the mid-1650s, Oliver Cromwell's once boundless energy was beginning to wane. The weight of governing a fractured nation, the constant political intrigue, and the pressures of military campaigns had taken their toll on his health. Once a man of indomitable strength and conviction, Cromwell now found himself increasingly confined by illness. His robust frame, which had withstood the hardships of war, began to falter under the burdens of leadership. As he aged, he became more reflective, grappling with the future of the protectorate he had fought so hard to establish. Cromwell knew that his time was running out. He had already weathered internal dissent, royalist uprisings, and deep divisions within his own government. But the question of succession loomed large. Who would lead the fledgling Commonwealth after his death? His son, Richard Cromwell, was the natural heir, but he lacked his father's military prowess and commanding presence. Cromwell's faith in divine providence, which had guided him through years of conflict, now left him contemplating the uncertain future of the nation. was given a state funeral fit for a king, a lavish affair that reflected the enormous power he had wielded. His body was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, a place traditionally reserved for monarchs and royalty. Even in death, Cromwell's unique status as both a man of the people and a ruler with almost regal authority was evident. But the grandeur of his funeral could not mask the instability that his passing unleashed. Within months, it became clear that the Commonwealth was built not on solid foundations, but on Cromwell's personal authority. Without him, the structure he had fought to create began to crumble. His son Richard was ill prepared to fill his father's shoes. Lacking the military support and political acumen that had been central to Oliver's success, Richard quickly found himself overwhelmed by the factions within Parliament and the army. His tenure as Lord Protector was short-lived, lasting less than a year before he was forced to step down, unable to hold the Commonwealth together. With Richard's resignation in 1659, the door was open for the return of the monarchy. The country was once again plunged into chaos as Royalists and parliamentarians clashed over the future of England. It became clear to many that the experiment of the Commonwealth had failed. The political vacuum left by Cromwell's death created an opportunity for Charles II, the exiled son of the executed King Charles III, to reclaim his father's throne. In 1660, just 2 years after Cromwell's death, the monarchy was restored in what came to be known as the Restoration, and Charles II was crowned king. The Commonwealth, which had seemed like a revolutionary departure from the past, was swept away, and the rule of kings returned to England. In death, as in life, Oliver Cromwell remained a deeply polarising figure. His legacy sparked fierce debate across the British Isles and continues to do so today. To some, Cromwell was a champion of parliamentarianism, a man who had the courage to challenge the unchecked power of the monarchy and shape England's political future. His role in the English Civil War and the establishment of the Commonwealth is seen by many as a defining moment in the evolution of British democracy. In England, there are those who revere him for his efforts to curtail the abuses of royal authority, viewing him as a protector of liberties, even if his methods were often harsh. But across the sea in Ireland, Cromwell's name evokes a very different legacy. His brutal military campaigns in Ireland, particularly the Siege of Drogheda, left a stain on his reputation that has never faded. For many in Ireland, Cromwell is remembered as a villain, a man whose conquests brought death, destruction, and suffering to the Irish people. The massacres carried out under his command are seen as acts of barbarism, and his name is still reviled in Irish historical memory. Cromwell's complex legacy was summed up by Edward Hyde, the Earl of Clarendon, who famously reflected on his death with the words, "He was a brave, bad man." This duality captures the essence of Cromwell's life. A man of incredible courage and conviction, yet one whose actions were often ruthless. is neither simple nor straightforward. It is as complicated as the man himself. As time passed, Cromwell's reputation evolved. In some circles, he came to be seen as a precursor to the democratic movements that would later sweep across Europe. His opposition to absolute monarchy and his belief in the rule of law resonated with those who sought to limit the power of kings and expand the rights of Parliament. Yet, his heavy-handed rule as Lord Protector, his suppression of dissent, and his military conquests made him a figure whose methods were difficult to reconcile with his ideals. Cromwell's death marked the end of a revolutionary era in English history, but it also left behind a legacy that would shape the nation for centuries to come. His vision of a godly Commonwealth may have failed in the short term, but his impact on the political landscape of Britain was undeniable. The debates over his role, both as a villain and a hero, continue to be a source of fascination for historians and the public alike. As England moved forward into a new chapter under the restored monarchy, the echoes of Cromwell's rule remained. The Protectorate had come to an end, but the questions it raised about power, governance, and the relationship between the ruler and the ruled would linger long after his death. Oliver Cromwell's legacy is one of deep contradictions. He rose to prominence as a staunch defender of Parliament, yet he dissolved it when it no longer served his purpose. He fought against the tyranny of kings, only to become a ruler with nearly absolute power himself. Cromwell's life was a constant balancing act between his ideals and the reality of governing a deeply divided nation. His dream of a godly Commonwealth, ruled by the principles of justice and religious reform, was always at odds with the complexities of politics, warfare, and human nature. As Lord Protector, Cromwell wielded immense authority, often acting as a monarch in all but name. His restructuring of government and legal reforms left a lasting imprint on British history, shaping the future relationship between Parliament and the monarchy. Yet, his rule was also marked by heavy-handed tactics and a willingness to suppress opposition, raising questions about the price of power. Was Cromwell a liberator, or simply another figure who bent the system to his will? The paradox of his legacy is captured in his own words. No man rises so high as he who knows not whither he is going. Cromwell's ascent to power may have been driven by a deep sense of divine purpose, but the direction in which he led England remains a subject of debate. Beyond his political achievements and controversies, Cromwell's impact on British history cannot be denied. He forever altered the course of the nation, not just by dismantling the monarchy, but by reshaping the very fabric of governance. Even after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, the questions he raised about the balance of power between the Crown and Parliament would echo throughout future centuries, culminating in the constitutional monarchy we see today. As we reflect on Cromwell's life, we are left to grapple with the moral and political complexities of his actions. yet his methods were often brutal. The legacy he left behind is a reflection of these contradictions. A man who fought for freedom, but ruled with an iron hand. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the life of Oliver Cromwell. His story reminds us that history is never as simple as good versus evil. It is a tapestry of ideals, ambitions, and compromises. If you enjoyed this exploration of one of Britain's most controversial figures, don't forget to like and subscribe.